Hi, I'm Christy, editor, beta reader, and ghostwriter. And today, I'm going to go through a very brief developmental edit of Blood of Hercules by Jasmine Mas. Actually, this is part 1 of 3, where I talk about world building and logic. I'm not going to do a thorough edit of the whole monstrosity because it would honestly take forever. In my opinion, this book needs to be rewritten entirely. It is that bad on every conceivable level. I'm not even joking. This was one of the worst traditionally published works I have ever read for many reasons, including issues with world building, characterization, plotting, pacing, basic causality. In my last video, I went through a quick edit of 1 page of this novel, but I hadn't read the whole thing. Now I have, and I have words. Okay, this is the description of the book on Goodreads in case you don't know what I'm talking about. Alexis Heart, whatever, isn't a hero, and she certainly isn't a god. All she's ever been is a survivor, but the fates, capitalized, disagree. When a blood test leads to her admittance at the Spartan War Academy, she'll have to do more than merely survive. Alexis will have to claim her birthright, immortality. But immortality is a privilege, one earned in the crucible of the academy, where the heroes are villains and classrooms battlegrounds. While gladiators Achilles and Patro, her demanding mentors, hone her into a warrior, Augustus and Charon, her professors and the brooding heirs to the underworld, haunt her steps and her thoughts. Because where there are gods, there are bound to be monsters, and there is more than one hunting Alexis. Look, I'm not going to do a classic review of this thing because there are a lot of them out there by very talented people, but also it doesn't really matter for the sake of what I'm trying to achieve here, because this is one of those book talk romantasies, and a lot of them are extremely similar to each other. We've got the author avatar, who isn't really a character, but a vessel for a self-insert power fantasy. She has rainbow eyes, is a lot more special than she thought she was. Her trauma doesn't mean anything and is only there as a cheap way to garner sympathy, and it doesn't affect her when the author wants her to be cool and feisty. She, of course, is sarcastic and fiery whenever the author wants her to be, regardless of previous scenes when she acted completely differently, and all the boys want her. Also, all the men in this book and similar books are basically the same. There is no actual plot, just a Frankenstein monster composed of tire tropes that have not been woven into a coherent story at all. There are so many of these books out there right now. If you know, you know, so I won't actually review it here because it would be pointless. What I will do is use it, or rather its failings, as a springboard for offering some tangible advice on how to develop your world. Okay, enough rambling. Some books fall apart because of weak sentences. Blood of Hercules collapses because its entire world does. I wrote a rather uncharitable review of this novel on Goodreads, which reflects my honest opinion, but here I want to generally focus on what I would change to improve the reading experience. For that reason, I will treat this published work as if it were a first draft. At the end of this 3-part series, I will share my thoughts on not only the book as a work that is being sold for money, but also on what I perceive to be rather unfortunate publishing trends. Let's put a pin in that for now, so we can start developmentally editing an underdeveloped, not at all edited book like Blood of Hercules, as if it were a first draft sent to me by a client looking for honest and constructive feedback. By the way, I would not be this caustic if this were a manuscript, but it isn't. It's a published work. It costs money. It's not doing the general state of fantasy literature any favors, to say the least. And yeah, I have an opinion. Okay, alright. Now, like I said, this will not be an in-depth dive into this book, but a condensed version of my main gripes with world building and logic, or rather, lack thereof. Like I talked about in my last video, the book starts with 2 prologues, that is, info dumps, that the author thought were better than letting the readers discover the world as the story unfolds. Within a few pages, we're told that Sparta ruled an archipelago, existed before humanity, and somehow coexisted with modern-day Greece. The last part is just badly written, and I don't think the author really wanted to say that, but she ended up saying it anyway, but okay. This whole thing is a masterclass in how to make readers question not just your lore, but your grasp on geography, time, and logic itself. When I was done reading the book, I had enough comments to wallpaper my office. I wrote 42 pages of comments. I'm not even exaggerating. So let's talk about why this world doesn't work on any level, and more importantly, what writers can learn from this kind of mistake and from these blunders. Part 1. The geography problem. The very first line is a harbinger of things to come, to be melodramatic about it. It claims that Sparta sprawled across thousands of islands in modern-day Greece. In reality, and more importantly, in believable fiction, Sparta is landlocked. That's not just pedantry, it's spatial logic. If you move a famous city, you'd better tell us why. If it's meant to be an alternate world inspired by Greece, call it something else. If it's literally our Greece, congratulations, you've just turned mountains into islands and expected nobody to notice. So, what lesson can we learn here? World building begins with orientation. Readers need to know where they are before they can care what happens there. When in doubt, draw a map. Then, make sure your prose agrees with it. I'm going to repeat that a few times because it's important. Don't copy-paste your notes into the manuscript, drowning the reader in unnecessary history tidbits that don't matter to anyone but you. Instead, be precise. Be specific. Reveal only that which serves the purpose of the story and keep the rest to yourself. It's good to know your world. It's not good to up the word count by rambling about the world's entire timeline when 90% won't ever actually be relevant to the story. This is something I'm going to repeat a few times as well. Whatever you do reveal needs to make sense. It needs to be consistent with everything else. There needs to be a causal relationship between your statements. This book has none of that. Part 2. Time is not a mood. Next comes the timeline soup. The book says this world existed eons before humanity, yet humans appear a paragraph later. You can't have pre-human humanity unless you're writing about time travel or divine cloning. That's not mythic, that's just messy. Good fantasy stretches or compresses time on purpose. The author doesn't explain where people come from, why they went to Greece, how they even got there if they had to learn everything from the elves, Spartans, and why the Spartan society basically collapsed after the humans arrived. The timeline is iffy, the geography is ridiculously wrong, and there is absolutely no sense of cause and effect. This is something that you really need to keep in mind if you're creating a world. Actions have consequences. They're not just a laundry list of disconnected happenstances, like the total sum of this book. Okay, so what lesson can we learn here? Decide when your story happens and commit. Eons is not an aesthetic, it's a unit of measurement. Replace vague eternity with concrete information. For instance, before the first cities, in the age when rivers still remembered their names. Something like that. Precision creates power. Do not drop everything on your readers at once, but whatever you do reveal needs to make sense. And this is a major issue with books that have such shallow world building that is only there to provide an awesome background for the self-insert to look cool in. On the one hand, the author doesn't trust the readers to understand subtlety and careful reveals. On the other hand, everything is so poorly described, so superficial and lacking detail, it becomes impossible to picture anything. This is just the author wanting to get exposition out of the way, so she can write the scenes she's actually interested in. Thus, there is no cohesion in this book. Just a bunch of vaguely connected infodumps and scenes that don't match in tone or function. I'm serious. What even is the function of these info dumps, apart from the author failing to weave pertinent information into the narrative? When you add something to your story, ask yourself not only why, but what for? What purpose does this chapter, this scene, this focus even serve? What am I trying to achieve? If you, as the author, cannot explain this, you should really rethink what you've written. Part 3. History versus mythology. Pick one. This novel wants to be mythic and historical. It name drops modern-day Greece, then invents immortal elves, Spartans, with magical animals and divine powers who are really just elves in Hogwarts houses performing Hunger Games, to be a bit hyperbolic, but not really. The problem isn't ambition, it's execution. None of this is executed well. The lines between history and fantasy don't blend together, creating a mess of illogic that just leaves readers confused and annoyed if they're paying any attention to what they're reading. Historical fiction promises plausibility within our world. Mythic fantasy promises internal consistency within its world. Blood of Hercules manages neither. Sparta already means something: discipline, austerity, warcraft. Here, it's just branding, like calling your kingdom Atlantis Deluxe. Also, they're elves. Elves divided into Hogwarts houses fighting Hunger Games, and it really isn't as cool as it sounds, because the author gives us nothing except these are the good ones and these are the edgy ones. If you borrow real mythology, learn what purpose it served, then rebuild that logic inside your own world. Otherwise, you're just stapling stickers to a blank wall and stealing elements from better developed worlds. Both Harry Potter and The Hunger Games did this a lot better. Harry Potter is set in a world within our world, using places and terminology that we understand as we discover the magic along with the protagonist. The Hunger Games is set in the far future, which might as well just be a different planet. This is another example of how we discover the world through the protagonist's eyes and not through a way too long and rather confusing bunch of prologues that are filled with unnecessary fluff that in turn serves no purpose. The world unfolds before us as we become engrossed in the story. And say what you want about the world building in Harry Potter or the Hunger Games, and I have some choice words, at least for the Harry Potter series, beyond the first book. It's cleverly woven into the narrative, never overwhelms the readers, and largely makes sense. In addition, the characters in these books are affected by the world around them in a way that shapes their personality, how they look at the world, and how they understand it and their place in it. Blood of Hercules just offers a backdrop that the author thinks is cool, but everyone just behaves like a bunch of millennials. Being a millennial myself, I should know. There's even a high school with bullies called Jessica and Taylor. See what I mean? You have pages upon pages of exposition, but if you cut all of it out, what you're left with is a world with high school drama, mean girls, and social media. The supposed apocalypse doesn't affect anything or anyone, it's just background noise. None of it is necessary for the narrative. And that's another thing, if your story doesn't need something, cut it out. Don't inflate the word count for no good reason. Every word in the story should be there for a reason, and whether it's plotting, characterization, or world building, these need to intertwine and support each other. Part 4. The invisible physics of fantasy. In this universe, things happen because the author says so. Islands rise, gods appear, civilizations vanish. No cause, no consequence. There's just no explanation for anything. Stuff just happens, and we're left scratching our heads. This whole thing reads like fanfiction. The author wanted to get the boring stuff out of the way so she could vicariously live through awesome adventures with her avatar. If you keep that in mind, the lack of actual structure, plotting, or three-dimensional world building makes more sense. But people paid money for this thing, so it's really hard to remain charitable. But this is fantasy, you may say. So what if the author makes things up? Well, to that I reply, fantasy doesn't need realism, but it does need rules. Readers will believe in dragons if they follow consistent biology and if the dragons actually have an impact on the world they inhabit. Readers will believe in immortals if immortality changes how they live, if it has any impact on a person's psychology, if the world in which these creatures exist is consistent. Here, Nothing affects anything. What motivates an immortal to farm, paint, or even get out of bed? Why did they wage wars? Why are they basically divided into Hogwarts houses? Why did the so-called Spartans go into hiding from the humans if they are this ridiculously overpowered? How did the humans defeat them? Why did they go from there to conquering everything again? And how are the humans responsible for these Spartans, going from peaceful and kind to murderous jerks if they worship them as gods? Why did they worship them as gods? If the Hellenic myths are all wrong, how did these misconceptions start in the first place? If these Spartans, are all real and have tangibly affected the course of human history, how did that happen? And was it just the Greco-Roman world or all humans before modernity? You see what I mean? We get this gigantic info dump at the beginning, but it doesn't actually paint the picture of a three-dimensional world at all. It's just a bunch of narrative gaps clumsily stitched together. I'm not saying that you have to know all of the details of everything in your world, but if the whole thing falls apart after the tiniest bit of scrutiny, then you, as an author, have some work to do. Also, if you don't dump information without context, the contradictions in the world building will be harder to spot. The problem is that, again, it just reads like a self-insert, wish fulfillment power fantasy, not an actual world where people live and are affected by their experiences. Let's use the Hunger Games as an example again. We learn about the world through Katniss as she experiences the events of the story. There are no giant infodumps that make us realize that none of it actually makes sense, which would destroy a suspension of disbelief. Now, is the world building perfect? No. Some things are kind of silly, like the fact that there's a high school in District 12, but it's not a deal breaker because it's a detail that's cleverly woven into the story in order to make a point. The narrative didn't come to screeching halt so Katniss could explain to us that high school didn't exist, then it did exist, and people were there, then nobody was, and oh, I had chicken for lunch. See what I mean? Not only do the rules need to be consistent, but they need to fit the needs of the story too. At least how much you reveal. It's great if you have a whole world Bible for your fictional universe, but don't dump it on the reader with no rhyme or reason. Reveal only what matters in the context and what pushes the narrative forward. And just as importantly, if you're going to write from the perspective of a specific character, only reveal what that character sees, what matters to them, how it affects them, and how they interpret it based on their lived experience. That's what Suzanne Collins does with Katniss, and it works beautifully. Part 5, the because I said so syndrome. Okay, so humans arrive in Sparta. They instantly worship the immortals. Why? I have no clue. The elves, Spartans, teach them art and agriculture and governance, apparently from scratch, and suddenly, thus the Spartans became humanity's gods. That single word, thus, tries to cover thousands of years of theology. It's the narrative equivalent of a shrug. The whole book is like this. This isn't just a world-building issue, but a problem with characterization and pacing too. It's all connected. You cannot really separate them, but for now, let me hammer this in. Causal links matter. Logic matters. Consistency matters. If someone reads your manuscript and you can't answer why a culture behaves in a certain way, then this culture is underdeveloped. Cause and effect are what drive developments, history, personal decisions, plot. If an author is not willing to apply critical thinking to their own world, they should not publish their manuscript. The manuscript is not ready. And that's a big issue too. You need to show your world to your readers through the eyes of your characters, not just dump Wikipedia articles on them. Point of view is a great way to world build and characterize at the same time. Not only do your readers learn what the world is like and why, they also learn what the characters prioritize. Blood of Hercules has none of that. There are no actual points of view because this book does not have characters or a developed world. It's just a loose string of stuff happening to paper dolls with no rhyme or reason, minimal descriptions, and no immersion whatsoever. Good world building is invisible labor. You feel the history, but you don't trip over it. In this book, Exposition stands naked and unashamed, paragraph after paragraph of disconnected lore. It reads like a travel brochure for a place that doesn't exist, written by someone who's never been there and has no individual opinions. World building works best when it's a byproduct of the story, not a substitute for it. Over explaining comes from fear that the readers won't get it. But fantasy readers are puzzle solvers by nature. They want breadcrumbs, not encyclopedias. Every info dump slows the story and kills wonder. When you spell out everything all at once without context, you rob readers of discovery, and discovery is the heartbeat of fantasy. So, what can we learn? Withhold information strategically. Give just enough to spark the next question. Curiosity keeps pages turning. Confusion closes the book. And again, it needs to make sense. It needs to feel like an actual place, not just a two-dimensional backdrop where the paint's peeling off. Which is why I keep saying that we, as readers, want to discover the world as we get to know the characters and get swept away by the story. I feel absolutely nothing but boredom and annoyance at gigantic, contradictory infodumps that contain, simultaneously, too much stuff nobody cares about and too little actual detail to make the world believable. Whatever you choose to present to your readers, it needs to matter. It needs to be important to the setting, the characters, the story itself. If it doesn't really matter, you can delete it and just toss it, forget it, rethink it. But don't keep it in your story. Part 6. Takeaway for writers. If your world doesn't obey its own logic, no amount of romance, magic, spice, or war can save it. Consistency is immersion. Without it, even the prettiest prose collapses like paper mache in the rain. And the prose wasn't pretty, but that's a line editing issue and a topic for another day. When you build your world, remember 3 golden rules. 1. Define the borders. Your geography and timeline are the stage. If they wobble, the play falls apart. 2. Respect causality. If elves are real and have superpowers, this will change how societies develop. It will change cultural norms, borders, languages, people. You cannot just slap Hogwarts Marvel elves onto the real world and expect everyone in the year 2090 to be a bunch of millennials. 3. Tie lore to life. A world only feels real when it shapes how its people eat, fight, love, and dream. If this backstory you dreamed up has no effect on anything, then you should rethink the whole thing. Blood of Hercules fails because it mistakes naming for creation. But for writers, this kind of failure is a gift, a reminder that world building isn't decoration, it's infrastructure. Build it strong, and your story will stand. Okay, that's part 1 of a developmental autopsy of Blood of Hercules. In part 2, we're going to talk about what happens when the people living in that shaky world have the emotional depth of cardboard. Spoiler, nothing good. We'll dig into characterization, plotting, and pacing, the human side of structural failure, and see how those flaws mirror the same lack of logic we found here. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what world-building sins drive you up the wall. Anyway, thank you for your attention. I hope you had fun, and I will see you in part 2.